Imagine one ordinary day when everything seems normal, you get the call that changes your life forever. You're told that your daughter, your precious disabled daughter, has been shot. But here's the twist: the person who shot her, someone you thought you could trust, claims it was all in self defense. Can you even begin to wrap your head around that? A mother's worst nightmare becomes a twisted nightmare of betrayal. How could this happen? Why would someone who was supposed to protect her hurt her instead? In today's story, we dive deep into the shocking and disturbing truth about how HOA Karen shot my daughter in the back, all while hiding behind the lie of self defense. You won't believe the chilling details that follow. Stay with us, because this story doesn't just challenge your perception of right and wrong, it'll leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about trust, justice, and what happens when the system fails you. Let's take a step back to a time when life felt simple and carefree, before everything changed. My daughter, Emily, was born with a disability that affected her mobility, but she had a spirit that defied her condition. Despite her challenges, she was a bright, happy soul, always surrounded by love and care. She relied on me and the people around her for support, people like our neighbors who, for years, had been friendly and supportive. We lived in a quiet suburban community, nestled in a peaceful neighborhood that, at least from the outside, seemed like the ideal place for raising a child. Our house was modest, yet it was filled with warmth, laughter, and a sense of security. But as with all seemingly perfect situations, things weren't always what they appeared. Our neighborhood had an HOA, Homeowners Association, that was supposed to keep everything running smoothly. At first, everything was fine. The HOA did its job, ensuring the neighborhood remained tidy and organized. But then, everything changed when Karen became more involved. Karen was an active member of the HOA, a woman who had been living in the neighborhood longer than most, and a person many people respected. At least that's what I had always thought. She'd lived a few doors down from us for years, and for the most part, we never had any major issues with her. She was the kind of person who would smile and wave when we crossed paths, a pleasant enough neighbor who would occasionally help out with things around the community. But then, something shifted. It wasn't an overnight change, but it was unmistakable. Karen's behavior started becoming erratic, distant, even cold. It started with small things, strange comments about how we were maintaining our property, random warnings about noise or disturbances, and a general sense that she was scrutinizing our every move. I brushed it off at first, thinking she was just being overzealous in her duties as a member of the HOA. But as the months went by, Karen's demands and complaints became more personal. She started showing up unannounced at our doorstep, criticizing every little detail about how we were living. The neighborhood was starting to feel less like a welcoming community and more like a pressure cooker with Karen at its helm. My daughter, who had always been so kind-hearted and oblivious to drama, started picking up on the tension. Things took a darker turn when, on one particular evening, Karen came to our door uninvited. I had just finished helping Emily with her dinner, and we were about to settle in for the night when I heard a knock. At first, I thought it was just a routine check-in or another trivial complaint. But when I opened the door, Karen was standing there, her face expressionless, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. She had something in her hand, something that I didn't recognize at first. "I need to talk to you about some issues," she said. Her tone was cold, authoritative, like she was in charge of something far bigger than just a small neighborhood association. I felt uneasy but agreed to hear her out, not knowing that this conversation would mark the beginning of a terrifying chain of events that would forever change our lives. In those moments, I didn't realize that Karen's true intentions were not about rules or complaints. They were about control. And soon, she would do something unimaginable, something that no one could have seen coming. And as for Emily, my daughter, the very person I had always protected, she was about to face a danger she could never have imagined. The stage was set. What was once a peaceful neighborhood, filled with friendly faces and quiet nights, had slowly turned into a battlefield where one person's unchecked power would soon come to a head. And the worst part? No one could have predicted how far Karen would go. The The tension had been slowly building, creeping in like a storm on the horizon, and I could feel it. The once peaceful days in our home had started to feel unnerving, as if we were constantly walking on eggshells, trying to avoid Karen's increasingly bizarre behavior. The HOA, under her direction, had begun sending us threatening letters. At first, it was a few notes about trivial issues. Our lawn wasn't perfectly trimmed, our trash bins were out a little too early. It felt like a game of cat and mouse, with the HOA constantly trying to catch us in some sort of infraction. But these small issues, these petty complaints, were merely the surface of something darker. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that they were just rules, rules that didn't really matter. But over time, the nature of the complaints grew more personal. Every little thing about our home seemed to irritate her. The way we parked our cars, the sound of Emily's laughter, even the color of our front door. I'd spend hours trying to keep up with Karen's ever-growing list of demands, all while trying to keep Emily's spirits up, making sure she felt safe and comfortable in her own home. But it wasn't just the HOA's rule enforcement, it was Karen herself. Her demeanor began to change. She started showing up at our door more frequently, unannounced, demanding things that made no sense. At first, I thought she was just trying to intimidate me, make me bend to her will. But as the weeks passed, it became clear this wasn't just about control. It was something more sinister. One evening, I was sitting with Emily, helping her with her homework, when I heard a knock at the door. It was a strange hour, well past sunset. I looked at the clock, confused. Who could it be at this time of night? I checked the peephole and saw her, Karen, standing there, her arms crossed, a look on her face that sent a chill down my spine. There was no mistaking it. She had come with a purpose. What is it this time? I asked, opening the door. I tried to sound calm, but I knew something wasn't right. I need to talk to you about some issues regarding your property, Karen said, her voice as cold as ice. But the way she said it, like she had all the power, like she was entitled to demand whatever she wanted, struck me as off. She didn't wait for an invitation. Without asking, she stepped into the doorway, her eyes scanning the house, her gaze lingering on Emily, who was in the living room. We've had some complaints, Karen continued, but she didn't specify from whom. I had no idea what she was talking about. Emily was in the next room, as always, minding her own business. What could possibly have gone wrong? I tried to stay composed, but my patience was running thin. Karen, we've discussed this before. Everything is fine. Please, don't come here anymore with these nonsensical complaints. You're making everyone uncomfortable. Her eyes narrowed. You'll regret this. The HOA has the authority to enforce all rules, and you will comply. If not, well, you know what happens to those who don't follow the rules. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized what she was implying. This wasn't just about enforcing HOA regulations anymore. She was using the HOA as a tool to control us, to break us down. She was making threats, not just against my property, but against my family. You have no right to talk to me like that, I said, trying to stand my ground, but the fear in my voice betrayed me. I suggest you keep that attitude in check, she shot back, her tone icy. Or else I'll have to take matters into my own hands. Her words hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. I was too stunned to respond, and before I could even say anything else, Karen turned and walked out, her heels clicking against the floor as she left. I stood in the doorway, feeling the weight of her words pressing down on me. Over the next few days, the tension grew. Karen's visits became more frequent, and each time, she seemed more demanding, more unhinged. Emily, who had always been so carefree, began to notice. She could sense the unease in the house. I tried to shield her from the drama, but there was no escaping it. Every time Karen showed up, the atmosphere shifted. It was like the walls were closing in around us. The HOA, under Karen's watch, continued to harass us. Notices about trivial issues began arriving almost daily. It was like they were looking for a reason to punish us. I spent hours every week reading through the complaints, trying to find some loophole to defend us, but every time I thought I had one, another notice arrived, even more ridiculous than the last. I had no idea how to stop it. Karen seemed determined to make our lives miserable. But the worst was yet to come. One evening, while Emily and I were in the kitchen preparing dinner, I heard a loud bang, followed by a chilling silence. My heart raced. I rushed out of the kitchen, my mind already racing, already fearing the worst. I froze when I saw Karen standing in the doorway, a gun in her hand. The world seemed to slow down as she raised it, her eyes locked on Emily, who was sitting at the dining table. "Get away from my daughter," I shouted, rushing forward, but it was too late. The shot rang out. I saw Emily fall, her body crumpling to the floor, her scream echoing in my ears. Time seemed to stop, and I couldn't move. I wanted to scream, to run to her, but my body wouldn't respond. I was frozen in place as Karen lowered the gun, her face devoid of emotion. "It was self-defense," she said coldly, almost matter-of-factly, like she had just made a routine decision. The room spun. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Karen, the woman who had once been just a neighbor, had now become the person who had just shot my daughter in cold blood. And the worst part? She expected me to believe that it was self-defense. As the blood drained from my face, I realized that this was no longer about rules or complaints. It was about something far more dangerous. This was an act of vengeance, of cruelty, and it had been building for months. But the real question was, why? Why had Karen done this? What had pushed her to this point? And how could she justify something so horrific? I rushed to Emily, my hands shaking as I cradled her in my arms. The blood, her lifeless body, it was all too much, but I couldn't allow myself to fall apart. I had to find out the truth. I had to understand what had happened. And I wasn't going to let Karen's twisted version of events go unchallenged. The tension, the fear, the confusion, it was all too much to process in that moment. But I knew one thing, this was far from over. And Karen, whatever she had planned, had no idea what she had just set in motion. The world slowed down in that moment, the echo of the gunshot reverberating in my mind like a drumbeat that refused to stop. Time, which had always seemed like a constant rhythm, fractured in that split second, leaving me suspended in a terrible stillness. I couldn't process what had just happened. I had heard the shot, clear, sharp, and terrifying. But it took a moment for my brain to catch up with the reality that my daughter, the one person I'd promised to protect with every ounce of my being, was now lying on the ground, her blood soaking into the floor beneath her. "Emily!" I screamed, my voice raw, desperate, and filled with panic. I rushed toward her, my legs trembling beneath me as I fought to close the distance between us. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic rhythm I couldn't control. When I reached her, I could barely breathe. The sight before me was something I had only ever seen in nightmares. My daughter, my sweet girl who had always been so full of life, was now crumpled on the floor, her fragile body twitching slightly with the shock of what had just happened. Her clothes, once bright and cheerful, were now stained with a deep red that spread quickly across the fabric, as if the very color of her innocence had been torn away. "Mom, Mom, it hurts," Emily whispered, her voice weak, her eyes barely open as she looked up at me with pain and confusion written all over her face. It was like a punch to my gut, the sound of her voice barely audible over the pounding in my ears. I tried to stay calm, to think clearly, but it felt impossible. The fear was overwhelming. The panic clawed at me, and my brain screamed for me to do something, anything, but all I could do was hold her. My hands, slick with her blood, shook uncontrollably as I pressed them against the wound in a desperate attempt to stop the bleeding. I called out for help, but the words caught in my throat. What good would it do? Who could save her in this moment of chaos? Who could fix this? I could already feel the heat of her blood soaking through my clothes, the warmth of it mingling with my own fear, and the reality of what had happened slowly began to sink in. But in the midst of all this, one thing was clear: it was Karen. The woman who had always been an ordinary neighbor, the one I had once trusted, was the one who had pulled that trigger. And now, standing in the doorway, Karen was watching us unmoved. She wasn't rushing to help. She wasn't showing any remorse. No, Karen stood there coldly, a steely look in her eyes, as if nothing had happened. She was calm. She was unaffected. And then, with a chilling nonchalance, she muttered, self-defense. Self-defense? The words were so absurd, so disconnected from the reality of the situation, that I couldn't comprehend them at first. What are you talking about? I gasped, my voice cracking as I held Emily, my eyes never leaving Karen. What do you mean self-defense? She's a child. She's disabled, Karen. She couldn't hurt you, even if she tried. But Karen didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look sorry. Instead, she stood there, her expression unchanged, as if it was all perfectly normal. Her coldness only added to the horror of what I was experiencing. How could she say that? How could she justify what she had done with those two words as if it was just an ordinary accident? I felt my mind beginning to unravel. Nothing made sense. I couldn't fathom how this woman, who had once been an ordinary part of our lives, could now be the one who had inflicted this pain on my family. What had driven her to this? What could possibly justify what had just happened? The more I thought about it, the more the confusion twisted in my gut. It felt like I was drowning in a sea of disbelief, and no matter how hard I tried to grasp onto something solid, I kept sinking further. I looked at Emily, my heart breaking as I saw her struggle to stay awake, to stay with me. I tried to comfort her, but my words were hollow, as if they couldn't reach her through the suffocating wall of fear and confusion that had settled over us. "It's okay, Emily," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Just hold on. Just hold on, okay? I'm here. I'm right here." But even as I spoke those words, I knew they were empty. I couldn't promise her that everything would be okay. I couldn't make this better. There was no magic phrase that would heal her wounds, no miracle that would take away the agony she was feeling. I was powerless, and as I watched Emily fade, my emotions shifted from confusion to an overwhelming sense of anger. How could Karen do this? Why would she do this? My mind replayed every interaction we had ever had with her. I tried to make sense of it, but the only conclusion I could come to was that Karen had crossed a line that no one should ever cross. The woman who had been a part of our lives, who had shared in our joy and our struggles, had become the source of our greatest pain. But I couldn't dwell on that. I couldn't let myself get lost in the madness of it all. I had to focus. I had to save Emily. I had to find a way to keep her alive, to get her help. With every ounce of strength I had left, I forced myself to focus. I picked up my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed 911. The operator's voice sounded distant, as if coming from another world, but I tried to steady my breath as I spoke. "My daughter, she's been shot by my neighbor. Please, please help her." The words felt foreign, like they weren't even coming from me. But the operator was calm. She gave me instructions, told me what to do to try to stop the bleeding, to keep Emily conscious. It felt like hours before the ambulance finally arrived, but in truth, it was only a few minutes. And in that time, Karen never moved. She didn't speak. She just stood there, watching as the life drained from my daughter's body, as I fought to save her, as I felt myself unraveling. She didn't care. She didn't care at all. When the paramedics arrived, they rushed to Emily's side, taking over the care I had desperately tried to provide. I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest as they worked to stabilize her. I watched them, helpless, my mind still reeling from what had just happened. "Stay with me, Emily," I whispered, my voice breaking as I reached for her hand. "Stay with me, please." But even as I said those words, I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The fear, the confusion, the anger, it was all too much. And as I stood there, watching the paramedics work on my daughter, I knew that this was only the beginning of a long, painful journey. The road ahead would be filled with questions, with lies, with uncertainty, and with a truth that was too hard to bear. But above all, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let Karen get away with this. Whatever it took, whatever I had to do, I was going to make sure she faced the consequences of what she had done. Because a mother's love knows no boundaries. and a mother's determination is stronger than any force in the world. The days following the shooting were a blur of emotions, hospital visits, police investigations, and endless paperwork. Every moment felt like an eternity as I clung to hope, watching Emily's fragile body fight for survival, while simultaneously trying to navigate a world that had been turned upside down. It was as though everything I knew about trust, safety, and justice had been shattered, and I was left struggling to put the pieces back together. What I couldn't have predicted, however, was how difficult it would be to get the truth recognized in a world where Karen's version of events was being accepted without question. As the hours passed and Emily was stabilized, I found myself constantly at her side, holding her hand, whispering assurances I didn't know how to believe myself. The doctors had told me that she was in critical condition, but they also said there was a chance she would recover. That small glimmer of hope became my anchor. But at the same time, my mind could not escape the questions that haunted me. Why did Karen do this? What had gone so wrong between us? And perhaps most pressing of all, how could I get justice for my daughter? The police were quick to arrive, but what followed felt like a bureaucratic nightmare. Initially, I expected them to launch a thorough investigation, but instead, they treated Karen's story with an alarming amount of credibility. She claimed that Emily had threatened her, an outrageous statement considering Emily could barely walk, let alone pose any real threat. Yet, the officers, perhaps swayed by Karen's calm demeanor or her role in the HOA, took her account seriously. I could feel the pit of my stomach churn every time I heard Karen's words echoing in my mind. Self-defense, she had said, as though it was an explanation that justified everything. It didn't make sense. None of it did. My daughter had never been violent, and certainly she had no reason to threaten anyone, especially someone she had known for years. But there I was, sitting in the hospital room, surrounded by doctors and officers, and Karen's fabricated narrative seemed to be gaining more weight than the truth. The emotional toll of this experience was staggering. I wasn't just trying to save my daughter's life, but also her future and my own sense of justice. I spent hours in the hospital replaying every interaction I'd had with Karen in my head, looking for any clue, any scrap of evidence that could unravel her lies. At the same time, I couldn't help but reflect on how far she had gone, how she had manipulated the system to her advantage, and how the people around her were complicit in letting it happen. I found myself falling deeper into despair, knowing that if I didn't fight with every fiber of my being, Karen would get away with it. My frustration only grew as I dealt with the authorities. Every time I presented new evidence or questioned the plausibility of Karen's story, I felt like I was being dismissed as though I was overreacting. How could I convince them that my daughter, in her vulnerable state, could never have been a threat? I knew that if I wanted justice, I would have to dig deeper. The first few weeks felt like an uphill battle. I met with lawyers, hoping they could help me find a way to make Karen face the consequences of her actions. But there were roadblocks at every turn. There were no witnesses to the shooting, no footage, and the only person telling the story was Karen, an expert manipulator who had positioned herself as an innocent victim. She had a knack for twisting the truth, painting herself as the one who had been wronged. And in the eyes of the law, that was enough to raise doubts about my own version of events. But despite the overwhelming odds, I refused to give up. I spent countless nights researching, speaking with experts, and sifting through evidence, looking for anything that could prove Karen's story was false. Slowly, the pieces began to fall into place. It became clear that Karen's account was full of holes. There were discrepancies in her timeline, inconsistencies in her behavior leading up to the incident, and most importantly, no clear explanation for why she had acted so violently toward a vulnerable child. The more I investigated, the more I realized how broken the system was. The way Karen's position in the community had shielded her from scrutiny was infuriating. How had it come to this? How had I ended up fighting not only for my daughter's life, but for the very notion of justice itself? It felt like I was fighting against an invisible wall, one built of privilege, power, and corruption. Karen's lies didn't just end with the shooting. She had spread rumors around the neighborhood, distorting the truth even further. Every time someone asked about the incident, she had an explanation ready, one that painted her as the hero and my daughter as the villain. It was maddening to think that the community I had once felt safe in was now complicit in covering up her actions. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming. Not only had she betrayed me and my family, but she had also manipulated everyone around her, turning them into unwitting participants in her twisted game. As the weeks dragged on, Emily's recovery became the only light in an otherwise dark period. She fought as I knew she would, with a determination that was nothing short of inspiring. But even as she slowly regained her strength, I could see the toll this had taken on her. The trauma she had endured, both physical and emotional, was something no child should ever have to experience. Every time she closed her eyes, I could tell she relived the horror of that moment. Every flash of movement or loud noise seemed to trigger a panic response in her. It wasn't just the physical scars, it was the psychological ones that worried me the most. I began to realize just how deeply this experience had affected me too. The constant fight for justice, the overwhelming grief, the rage, it was consuming me. I found myself losing sleep, replaying every moment of the incident over and over in my mind. Every time I saw Karen's face, I felt a surge of anger that threatened to tear me apart. I had been a mother fighting to protect her child from the moment she was born. But now I was fighting something much bigger, a system that seemed indifferent to the suffering of the vulnerable, a world where the truth could be twisted to suit those in power. But despite the relentless setbacks, I kept pushing forward. It became clear that this fight was bigger than just my daughter and me. It was about holding Karen accountable for the harm she had caused, but also about shining a light on the deeper flaws in a system that allowed this to happen in the first place. As I navigated through the legal process, I realized that there was a larger conversation to be had about justice, privilege, and the abuse of power. How many people, like Karen, had used their position in society to escape consequences? How many had hidden behind false stories, leaving the victims to pick up the pieces? And yet, despite the overwhelming odds, there were moments of clarity. There were small victories along the way, every new piece of evidence that came to light, every bit of progress made in the investigation. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going. It wasn't just about winning the case, it was about ensuring that Emily's voice was heard, that her story wasn't drowned out by lies. The more I reflected on the ordeal, the more I understood the true depth of the emotional toll it had taken on me. It wasn't just the fight for justice, it was the constant fear of losing my daughter, the overwhelming helplessness that comes with not being able to protect your child from harm. It was the isolation, the sense of being alone in a battle no one else seemed to understand. I felt as though I had been stripped of everything, my sense of safety, my trust in the community, and my peace of mind. But in some ways, it had made me stronger. It had awakened a resilience in me that I didn't know existed. I had always been a fighter, but this had taken that to another level. It wasn't just about my daughter anymore. It was about proving that justice still mattered, that no matter how powerful someone was, they couldn't escape accountability. I wasn't going to stop until Karen was held responsible for what she had done, and I was going to fight for Emily's future, no matter how long it took. And in the quiet moments when I looked at my daughter stronger each day, but forever changed, I knew that the fight was worth it. The battle wasn't over, but it had taught me something invaluable. No matter how broken the system may be, there is always a way to make your voice heard. There is always a way to stand up for what's right, even when it feels like the whole world is against you. And that, I realized, was the most important lesson of all. The final stage of this harrowing journey feels like both an end and a beginning, but in truth, it is neither. Justice for Emily, the truth of what happened that night, was achieved, but what does it really mean to get justice? At what cost does justice come, especially when the system itself is flawed, when the lines between right and wrong are blurred, and when those meant to protect us are instead the ones who perpetuate the harm? The pain we've endured emotionally, physically, psychologically is a scar that will never fade. And it's not just my daughter's suffering that haunts me, it's the toll it has taken on all of us. The sleepless nights, the moments of fear when I see a flash of movement or hear a knock at the door. The crushing weight of knowing that for a long time, Karen's lies were allowed to flourish, that her manipulative narrative almost became the truth. This fight was never just about the incident, it was about what happened next. It was about how the system, the community, and even those in positions of power failed to see the truth for what it was. It's about how a person with enough influence can twist facts and manipulate people into believing a false version of events, even when the evidence points in a completely different direction. And yet, despite everything we did prevail, the truth was uncovered. Karen's version of events crumbled under scrutiny. The law, in the end, did its job, but it wasn't a seamless process. It wasn't quick or painless. There were moments of doubt, moments when I wondered if I could keep fighting, if it was worth it. But every time I saw Emily, every time I saw the resilience in her eyes as she fought to heal, physically and emotionally, it reminded me that we had to keep going. But justice is not always as clean-cut as it seems. The emotional scars left on my daughter, on our family, will never truly heal. The trauma runs deep, and no matter how many victories we secure, the pain of that night lingers. What happens to the people who suffer in silence, who aren't lucky enough to have someone fighting for them, someone who will relentlessly seek the truth no matter the cost? This is the question that will stay with me long after the legal proceedings end, long after the news cycle has moved on to the next story. The question that keeps me up at night is not just about Karen and her lies. It's about the world we live in. Why do people like Karen get the benefit of the doubt while people like us, vulnerable, struggling, are often ignored, brushed aside, or made to feel like we're the ones in the wrong? Why does it take so much to get justice? And why is the truth so often the hardest thing to believe? For now, I can tell you this. The journey doesn't end here. What we've uncovered, what we've learned, is only the tip of the iceberg. The systems in place, the ones meant to protect and serve, are broken in ways that most people don't even realize. The battle for justice may have been won, but there are countless others out there, hidden in plain sight, still waiting for someone to fight for them. In the end, this story isn't just about Emily. It's about all of us, every person who has ever been made to feel small, to feel powerless, to feel like their voice doesn't matter. This is about standing up to the manipulation, to the lies, and to the systems that perpetuate them. And it's about realizing that sometimes the biggest fight we face isn't with the person who hurt us, it's with the system that allows them to do it. So, I ask you, the audience, to reflect, to question. What do you believe? Who do you believe? How many times have we taken someone's word for granted simply because they seem trustworthy? And how many times have we turned away from the truth because it was too hard to face? This story isn't over. In fact, it's only just beginning. The questions I've asked are just the beginning of a much bigger conversation, one that I'll continue to have for the rest of my life. And it's a conversation I want you to be a part of. I've only shared the tip of the iceberg with you today. What we uncovered in the aftermath of Emily's shooting will shock you even more than what you've heard so far. There are layers to this story, pieces to the puzzle that still need to be put together. The truth is out there, and we're determined to find it. The question is, are you ready to come with us on this journey? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you won't miss any updates. You won't want to miss the next chapter of this unbelievable story. And if you feel moved by what you've heard, share the story. Share it with others, because the more we talk, the more we question, the more we uncover. Together, we can begin to piece together a truth that the world is desperate to ignore. Always question the version of events you're told. The truth is waiting to be found, and it's up to us to find it. If this story has resonated with you, if you found yourself questioning the truth and the systems that allow lies to flourish, then I urge you to stay with us. This journey isn't over, and there's much more to uncover. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell notification so you don't miss any updates on the ongoing fight for justice. This isn't just about one family's tragedy, It's about exposing the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. Join us as we continue to uncover the layers of this shocking story. HOA Denied Access is here to shed light on what's been hidden, to ask the hard questions, and to fight for the truth. Together, we can make sure that no story like this goes unnoticed. Don't let the truth be buried. Subscribe now and be part of the conversation. Let's make sure the world hears it.